Hello, friends. I wanted to do a quick intro before I start this clip as it wasn't included in the original recording. And that is a reminder that this is not specifically about one party or another. We are going to be talking about masculine and feminine energy and the toxic energy that happens when these two are pushed into their extremes and how they work within us as individuals. So this is really about healing an internal divide that makes us less susceptible to political games and sound bites. And so we can just kind of keep that with us as we go through this particular topic. And I hope that you enjoy the exploration of it and understand that this is not, in favor of one party or another. In fact, this is really about releasing both so that we can find more that we agree on and more productive ways to resolve larger societal issues. But first, we focus on resolving those divides internally. All right, enjoy. Hope to hear your what resonates and questions or concerns in the comments. So, I want to talk a little bit about politics, how politics is used against us, and not so much why, that's a much longer conversation, but more kind of the structure of how it's used against us, and give a few solutions or a few suggestions on how to, really and embody to heal that divide within the self, so that we can, um, we can shift, really shift out of this and help other people to do the same. So one of the reasons that politics has been used for a very long time to divide people, to divide groups, is because it divides our psyche. It divides our co-creative capability. So I'm going to switch over to speak more in energetic or spiritual terminology for a moment. And most of us are familiar with in our healing and the spiritual awakening, in the spiritual evolution journey, we start talking about masculine and feminine energy, feminine and masculine energy, as co-creation energy, as the two polarities that exist in all levels, at all parts of creation, that are necessary in all parts of creation, and of course exist within us, that also manifest in a physical way in a biological universe, that being, through a certain sexual orientation or sexual, the biological sex of a being, of anything within the animal kingdom. But really, our hormonal systems, everything kind of works on this masculine, feminine, the left and the right of the brain, through these two, let's call them polarities. What politics, or kind of superficial or chaos politics, does is it tells us that feminine energy is better than masculine energy, or masculine energy is better than feminine energy, which of course it's like working against the way of universal law. One is not better than the other. One is not more important. One is not better to be in. They are meant to come into union. As individuals, we are recognizing, we are becoming more fluent in the language and the experience of feminine and masculine energy. This is part of how we become more conscious, so that we can unify them, so that we can come into divine union and start the sacred co-creation dance. Okay, but in order for us to come into divine union and to do that, we have to first recognize that within ourselves, within our being, within our society, we have been operating in highly contrasted, split, and toxic, unhealthy feminine and masculine energy. And in you'll see that I did a video before talking about how actually the feminine leads, and this is a pretty radical proposition to consider, the feminine leads and always has, because the subconscious and the unconscious, that is the 95% of us, actually is what is usually running the show. And so why it is the feminine's energy that must start the healing process and start coming into coherence, which will allow the masculine energy to do the same, to start responding to a higher energy. So you can watch that video, maybe I'll link it below. All right, but for right now, what our politics does, and what so much of this world, when it wants to control somebody outside of you, when somebody wants to control, they're going to tell you, they're going to split these energies. Because they know that we can't function, and there's no healthy union, there's no healthy co-creation, there's no spiritual evolution if we have resistance to one of these energies. You know, if we are judging or ashamed of one of these energies, if we think that one is better than or more right than the other. So the left, representing more of the toxic feminine energy, that is imbalanced when it's in a battle with the right. It is denying any kind of truth that exists on the right. It is so separate that it is pulled into its toxic energy, its toxic feminine energy. And a toxic feminine energy, and again, I'm going to speak to this more in a spiritual way, so I want you to look at this mostly as the self, okay? And then it's interesting to contemplate and look at and how it plays out in the larger world. And again, understanding that chaos politics, or a lot of what's done in our outer society, uses this against us, and why we need to kind of release these loyalties to these tribal narratives, that are just that are confusing us, that are not allowing us to see an integrated, holistic picture of how all of getting to the real nuance, to the root of these issues, and allowing these energies to start working together, to start informing each other. So let's focus on the individual. Left, toxic feminine energy. What happens when let's look at the self, when we as individuals, whether we are a man or a woman, when we are in toxic feminine energy and leaning left in denial of the masculine energy, or in resistance, in a battle with the masculine energy, we are very much in our subconscious. So the feminine, when she's unhealed, when she's in toxic energy, she's all within that subconscious layer of trauma. Stuck in trauma narratives, the body is stuck in trauma pain. The mind is writing stories around that pain all the time. And the mind, or the ego self, is becoming very identified, is developing an ego identity that is based on that pain distortion, that is based on that pain body. Right? And so that victim narrative, that victim perspective, means that everybody else is a problem except for you. Everybody else can be an oppressor except for you. Or you're in a shame, this constant need to control, you're slapping yourself on the back in constant, makes me think of some of the religious contexts of, that sin that is behind you, because on the left, on the toxic feminine in that subconscious, is our sin, right? It's the things that we have done wrong, the mistakes that we have made, and therefore this need, this drive to punish ourselves, to constantly punish ourselves. So that energy, when we are in that energy, we'll find that we are constantly punishing ourselves and other people, that we are constantly judging ourselves and other people, that everybody else is a problem or the oppressor or has this darkness or is manipulative, but we are not, right? So it's everybody else, but not me. There's no look. You'll rarely hear, if we're in that, if we're leaning into that energy, we will rarely hear someone say, how have I contributed to this, to this dynamic? How have I been manipulative? You know, when we're healthy, when we're working on ourselves, that's usually one of the first questions that we ask ourselves, because we want to take responsibility for something, which is we're going to get into on the masculine side. But when we're in when we're detached, when we're in this kind of intense toxic feminine energy, we are never the problem. It is just everybody else. It's another country. It's the other gender. It's the other race. It's the other whatever it is. And so that feminine toxic energy really, because it feels like it needs to, there's also this obsession with emotional truth, subjective truth, what you did to me and how it made me feel. And while all of these things, the thing is that subconscious, all of this that's over here needs to be dealt with. It needs to be seen. And we're going to get to that in a minute when we go over to the right. But it has to go into masculine energy in order to start the healing process. The point is to dissolve this subconscious, this layer of disempowerment, this layer of trauma, to relieve the body of trauma and disempowerment, to realign, to tap into something that is much deeper, that is to get to the creative essence that's below this sort of trauma ego. Right? I can't get to my true essence self, to the true creative nature of myself, because I'm so stuck in this trauma identity. Okay, so that's more on the left. On the right, when we are out of balance as individuals, we are masters at bypassing. And kind of having an outer authority idea of how to fix the problem, being more productive, competence, discipline, right? The masculine is like, I'm going to whip myself into shape and habit myself into the best way of, into my highest potential, my better self. If I'm having a bad feeling, I'm just going to not allow myself to feel it and move into this other feeling. If somebody else is having a bad feeling, I'm just going to not allow myself to hear it, to have a nuanced conversation or feel it. I don't want to get into all of that feeling stuff. I just want to move into the good stuff, to the good vibration. I want my high vibes. And we'll see a lot of that in everything from everyday life. And again, yes, we can see this reflected in some of our politics as well. But let's look at it more, let's keep it in the individual. When we're in a spiritual bypassing place, we struggle with the complexities of our own trauma, our own negative feelings, and the subjective experiences of others. With this whole feminine, it's just uncomfortable. We don't know how to do it, and we think that we can kind of push ourselves past it. And what happens when we are doing this bypassing is that it's creating a dissonance, the feminine aspect, because if we're talking about the individual, so if I'm bypassing myself, I'm not in true connection with myself, right? So if I'm not in true connection with myself, if I'm not acknowledging certain traumas, certain pain, that's that icky kind of subconscious layer that nobody likes to look at in the beginning, especially when we're over here on the right. If I'm not doing that, then I can't dissolve those layers of self, and I can't receive true higher divine guidance. I can't really purify. I'm just sort of pretending. I'm performing on top of it. And this is going to create a greater cognitive dissonance from the self, right? An inability to be in truthful, vulnerable connection with the self. So I can't really be in truth. I think I'm looking for objective truth. You'll find a lot of that in the bypassing sphere. It's kind of like, here's the solution or the objective truth. Now let's just jump over there and get to it. And it kind of bypasses the whole journey, because truth actually comes through the journey. Otherwise, again, we're in disconnect. And what happens often also is that when this bypassing is happening in our masculine energy on the right, in this toxic masculine energy, is that it starts to feed The thing is that the shadow self cannot be, cannot be ignored. That energy can't just not be dealt with. It's going to go somewhere. And so it's going to start to grow. There's going to be like this shadow part of the self that continues to grow. So over here on the left, that shadow part of the self, when we're in our toxic feminine energy, we kind of just embrace it. We're kind of just like, yeah, I'm going to give in to all of my toxic thoughts and habits and depressed, and oh, isn't this all horrible, and this misery, and we kind of get comfortable in this shadow self, in this resentment place. When we're in the toxic part of it, when we're really as individuals leaning into our toxic feminine energy. And on the right side of it, it's like we're kind of denying that it's growing. We're denying that we're in this, that this shadow keeps growing, and this shadow can also be sucked into other people. It's like the way that if we're all the way over here, so if we're so focused on just being good without transmuting and dealing with some of this icky stuff in the middle, we're creating this light, high vibe kind of thing. They're in the way of this universe, how creation works. There's going to have to be a polar opposite that is created. So it's feeding, and welcome to the left and the right, even if we look politically. This is what happens. One is encouraging and feeding the shadow of the other. So how do we start to resolve this? How do we start to correct this within ourselves and within a larger society? Is that we start to embody. We have to start healing, moving from our feminine energy into our masculine energy. We need to, which begins with our feminine energy, by the way. So it is a feminine awakening. It is a feminine healing that needs to happen before the masculine can correct itself. Okay, and these two energies are going to start to appreciate each other, dance together, to understand that this is how we stay in balance. This is how we do healthy co-creation. One is not better than the other. They both must heal. But the feminine, meaning that trauma, the feminine aspect that holds the trauma, that holds the subconscious, that has to be looked at and dealt with first. And we need to be courageous enough and brave enough to heal and relieve those things so that we can then, and which we're doing through the masculine, we're taking responsibility for those feelings. We are releasing, we're not getting obsessed and stuck in this ego self that's coming through in the trauma, right? We want to go deeper than that. We want the real power of the feminine. We want the real power of interdependent community, the real power of balance. The real wisdom of the higher creation laws exist below and on top, must be cleansed. We can't feel them. We can't connect with the true laws. We can't connect with the higher intuitive guidance until we have, to a certain degree, forgiven and released all of this pain body distortion. And then great guidance can come in. And the masculine energy, it is competent and ready to take action and is just essentially corrected. So the masculine is dealing with its shadow. So as an individual, what we can do is balance these energies within ourselves, own our shadow, not indulge in it, take ownership of it. Recognize that the only thing that you can do as an individual is heal that within you. And when you do that, you inspire, even subconsciously, just through the field. You are inviting others around you to do the same. And this is how we get our power back. So one is not more important than the other. They both matter. And how we can see, political traps more clearly is by integrating and understanding this internal process within ourselves. So that is one way that we take that power back. That is one way that we kind of clear ourselves of these political, tribal, sound bites. Is that we have to get more nuanced and understand this internally, understand this energy internally, and then we're able to see more clearly and interact more clearly with that energy externally. I think that's good for today. We'll continue this topic later because I do think it's really important. And of course, we've been in some games. Well, we've been in games for a very long time, but recently, where we kind of believe that there's more truth on one side than the other. And I think it's really important that as individuals, we understand that we've got to pull ourselves out of this political game altogether. We really do. It doesn't mean you can identify your values, get close to what you really think, but really look at what tactics are most likely to bring about that priority or that value that you think is so important. To really listen to all sides and to try to free our minds and heal this this masculine feminine battle that we've been placed within ourselves and externally, and understand that that battle, the more that we think that these energies are opposing each other, the more that we believe that, the more that we believe stories about that, the more impossible it becomes for us to ever move into to spiritually anchor, to anchor higher spiritual laws and ways of being on this planet, because it requires a union of these energies, a union of self in order to do so. Okay, love and strength, everyone. Have a great week.